Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful Thursday morning, the 5th of February 2026. For those of you that are just joining us, I say welcome back to yet another edition on a Football Tribe UG. It's 43 minutes past the hour of 9 a.m. Here in Kampala, Uganda. Of course, like I told you yesterday, these days, we've been extending the start of our morning broadcast to accommodate our friends from in and around Europe, since Uganda is 3 hours ahead of them. So if I come at 9 sharp, that means it's 6 a.m. sharp for them. But if I come at 9:40, then it means it's 6:40, and some of them have possibly woken up. So for those of you that keep wondering why that is the reason, that is the case, as to why we do not come at 9 sharp, it's not because we are deliberate, that we are always late. It's a choice that we make to try and accommodate our friends who are regulars on this channel, and it's the reason, you are the reason as to why what we do, and therefore that's why we do not take your love and support for granted. That's why we take your contribution and participation quite seriously, that we make those exceptions to accommodate, to make sure that you partake in every aspect and discussion that we ought to have on this channel. This morning, we will be talking about the results from the semi-final of the second leg of the Carabao Cup semi-finals, there in which Manchester City beat up against Newcastle by 3 goals to 1 to book themselves yet another place in the finals of the competition, a competition that Pep Guardiola has won on multiple occasions. So we'll be talking about that and how Manchester City in the first stanza obliterated Newcastle, while on the other end, we'll also have perhaps a discussion on what Pep Guardiola insists should be a rule change, and he does promise to write a letter to the officials of the Carabao Cup to see if they can make an exception and have the rules changed, in as far as things go for the competition. Otherwise, I hope every single one of you is all right. So, like I said, yesterday we did witness the second semi-final of the EFL Cup that was played at the Etihad Stadium, as Manchester City beat up against Newcastle, by 2 goals to 1. Sorry, by 3 goals to 1, not to one. A very, very entertaining fixture, a game of two halves, an open-ended game, end-to-end kind of football. We saw some amendments to the starting 11s, sort of contrary to what some of us, our expectations were or our predictions, but that is not unique to that particular game alone. So we did witness a very scintillating first half from Manchester City, while we saw Newcastle trying to mount a comeback in the second, although their lack of clinical finishes in front of goal did deny them any opportunity of a potential comeback. We saw a burst of Omar Mamouche, who could have easily walked out of that game with a hat trick or even 4 goals when he started ahead of Brad Erling Haaland, while Tijan Reinders could equally have picked himself up a brace, but he only finished the game with 1 goal and an assist, of course, as Man City beat Newcastle by 3 goals to 1 to advance to the finals of the EFL Cup, the English Football League Cup, or the Carabao Cup, 5-1 on aggregate score in the final, in which they'll be meeting up against Arsenal. So, in the game itself, like I told you, we expect James Trafford to be in goal. He did start. I did not expect that Ryan Atnery would start up front, but he started there and he didn't look bad. Tijan Reinders, for me, one of the standout players of the game, even though the man of the match accolade was given to Omar Mamouche, who scored a brace, perhaps deservedly so, but I thought Tijan Reinders, what a player he was in that game. Anton Semenyo not having a bad evening as well. I thought he did okay. Phil Foden, maybe not at his very best, but he did no less look good. On the side of Newcastle, they left a lot to be desired, particularly in that first half, how they defended, because they went with the setup of a back three of Dan Burn, Steven Botman, and Malik Thiaw, but it didn't look to be working out, especially in the first half, with wing backs of Lewis Hall and Clan Trippier, Sandro Tonali, and Jacob Ramsey in midfield, with Joe Willock in there behind Nick Voltmada and Anthony Gordon. At Anthony Gordon, of course, being forced off in the first half towards the tail end of this first stanza through an injury before being replaced by Harvey Barnes. So what we did witness in the first half was not a lack of opportunities for Newcastle to try and get themselves in the score sheet. What we saw was the brilliancy of 23-year-old English goalkeeper James Trafford, as he did his best to deny Newcastle any goal scoring opportunities. That first half could have easily ended 3-3 or 3-2 in favor of City versus Newcastle. Had Newcastle been clinical enough, they had an opportunity fall to them in as early as the first, I think, quarter an hour when that opportunity fell to Joe Willock. But unfortunately, he could not make it count. He could now, for everything that Newcastle did wrong on the other side in front of goal, Man City are compensated with being clinical, and that's why in as early as the 7th minute, Omar Mamush had already opened the scoring to give Manchester City a 1-0 lead, while he was at it again in this 29th minute. There, I think it was Anton Semenyo laying on the ball for a header, which for a goal, which initially doesn't go in and gets a chance for a rebound of a header. And then in the 32nd minute, Tijan re-enters. Now, typical of what Manchester City have largely been this season is that they often go on to have a brilliant first half, but their second halves are often wanting. We saw that in the UEFA Champions League against Galatasaray. They led that game by 2-0 at halftime, but in the second half, they barely did much. We saw it against Tottenham Hotspur. They led that game by 2-0, but in the second half, they barely turned up, and that game ended in a 2-2 draw. I think for the first time in 155 games at the game against Tottenham Hotspur, Man City led the game at halftime by 2-0 and did not go on to win that game. So that was the first time it was happening in what? More than 4 years or so, or 5, close on there. So that tells you how good they had been when having a 2-0 lead. But yesterday they managed to hold it out. But like I said, it wasn't a result of their individual brilliancy or collective brilliancy that they managed to keep Newcastle out. It was because that Newcastle were not clinical with their attempts on goal. Because I can't count on my fingers how many moments Newcastle created in that first half that were worthy of a goal. And then when it gets to the second half, it even gets worse. While Anthony Elanga scored what turned out to be a mere consolation in that game, I can't help it think that moments later he missed what was an even easier chance, and he tapped that wide with Johan Wiss, I think, arriving beside him. So they missed so many chances in that second half, just like the case had been. In an ideal world, in a perfect world, Newcastle could have won that game, by the way, maybe by 6-4, or 5-4, because they were that good. At least they showed up in the second half. Of course, in the preview, I told you that Newcastle have not had a brilliant season. They've sort of blown hot and cold. They've been in and around there in the Premier League. They've sort of had their struggles, and a lot of things have not gone their way. While in the UEFA Champions League, they've done fairly okay to even make it to the playoff places in which they will be up against Carabao. In the Premier League, they've been far from that. In camp competitions, they've not been poor, or they haven't been that poor in any case. But they were up against the Man City side, who up until yesterday's stage had only conceded 1 goal in the competition. That goal coming against Swansea in their 3-1 victory over Swansea. So yesterday they conceded the second in the competition. Good morning, Pedri. How are you doing, my brother? Always a pleasure to see you around. So that first goal that comes in the 7th minute, Omar Mamush going through. Of course, it takes a deflection in there with a Dunban before the ball goes into the back of the net, beating Aaron Ramsdale, who I thought also made some significant saves, especially in the second half. That's why I've said the game could have easily been won by Newcastle 6-5, 6-4, or even more, had the two players been clinical. But had the two sides been more clinical than they were, because in the second half, I think Aaron Ramsdale denied Brad Haaland, I think, on two occasions. So it's really really interesting to watch. But I mean, the way Omar Mamouche does the backflip for that pass to Tijan Reinders, who then plays him into go on a run through, was simply amazing to watch. Was simply amazing to watch. And they took that early lead. On the other side, like I told you, Newcastle were busy firing blanks. Where you expected them to have a simple tap in, it did not happen for them. They made James Trafford look like prime Iker Casillas. So really, it, it, for a neutral fan who enjoys good football, who enjoys end-to-end kind of football, yesterday's match was really, really entertaining for you. If you're a Newcastle fan, then you're really, really pissed off that you could not take all your chances. And I remember, I think it was Anthony Gordon who plays in Joe Willock, and in trying to round the goalkeeper, he sort of misplaces, or he takes a slight touch to the ball, which instead of taking it away from the goalkeeper, he runs it down into his path, and then of course he goes on to score. Sorry, he goes on to capture that ball, and then the thingy, and Newcastle do not score. Otherwise, in that moment, it could have it could have been easily 1-1, but they could not make it count. They could not make it count. So, and that like I said, that was the nature of the game in the in the entire game. You say I support Manchester City. You're supporting them in the final, or that's who you support all through and through. Then the other person that was denied was Anthony Gordon. Again, still the game was still 1-0. So Newcastle, they are creating two goal scoring opportunities in quick succession before going to kneel down. That's the team I support. Seth. Oh, hi, Seth. Good morning. Good to have you on the channel. I hope you're okay. Then Manchester City, again, they relied on some really, really quick transitions, building out the ball. They did not do their usual intricate passing of, bounce the ball around across the entire pitch multiple times. This time around, because Newcastle were leaving themselves overly exposed, what Man City did were quick transitions, similar to what you get to see with Real Madrid. For example, the second goal, you have Tijan Reinders driving that ball through yards and yards of space before playing in Antoine Semenyo, who lays the cross, and then in trying to defend it, I think it was Kieran Trippier, he literally, instead of getting it over the bar or outside, he simply kicks it in the air before Omar Mamouche puts his head to it to make it 2-0. And at that point, you could almost sense it that the tide had run away from Newcastle, that there was no route to recovery. You say, which team do you support? I love football. First, for me, football is first love. And then I do pay allegiance to Arsenal, Real Madrid, the Brazil national team, and all the underdogs out there, depending on who they are playing against. But again, if you want to understand the significance of the game itself, look at the celebrations from Pep Guardiola. It tells you the significance of the moment. It tells you the appreciation of the moment that they are playing a semi-final, and that if they go through, they are going to a final where they've been before, a final that they've won before, because Pep Guardiola has won this competition on 4 consecutive times. It was his first trophy as a Manchester City manager back in 2018, for those of you that care to remember, in the 2017-2018 season. And then, of course, again, when I say that Newcastle were literally the orchestrators of their own downfall, even for the third goal that is scored by Antoine Semenyo, I think it was Dan Burn who deflects Antoine Semenyo's ball into the path of Tijan Reinders before he slots that ball into the back of the net. Semenyo was trying to dribble pass him to go to his left, and then he gets a little tap into it, and it simply ends up in the path of an oncoming Tijan Reinders, who places it in the bottom corner, and it's suddenly 3-0. So, like I said, very scintillating football for Manchester City. in that first half. They looked brilliant. They looked sharp. They looked unfazed. It almost felt like a preseason friendly of some sort. You never felt that they had been forced or um, they had been encouraged to work really, really hard for it. In some way or in some respect, it did feel a bit easy, it did feel a bit easy. And then still in that first half, when it's already 3-0, Aaron Ramsdale is forced into a save by Tijan Reinders when a ball strikes his lower abdomen, So again, Man City are giving it all the goal that you would expect, excuse me, in the semi-final. Contrary to what we had witnessed the day earlier, when Arsenal beat up against Chelsea by 0-0, this one was a more open-ended game. In the second half, you had Yohan Wissa miss the first opportunity of the second half, to pull one back because I don't know what he was trying. I don't know if he was trying to bend the ball beyond the goalkeeper or he was trying to place it, but he missed that. And again, it was another wasted chance for Newcastle. There was a penalty appeal by Yohan Wissa in that same game, but of course, that penalty appeal fell on deaf ears. And then Man City on the other side, they tried to go for it. Tijan Reinders could have, like I told you, he could have scored a brace in that game, but in the second half, he places that ball from Omar Mamouche just wide of the mark. He sort of, I understand what he was trying to do, that send the keeper in an opposite direction, literally in an opposite direction from where he was coming from, Aaron Ramsdale in goal. But it just didn't work out. It just did not work out. And so he places that ball wide in that attempt. Do you think Arsenal will beat Manchester City? I am not sure. I mean, it's too early to say because we still have a whole month and a half to get to the final because it will be played on the 22nd of March 2026. Now, a lot can change between now and then. I do not know what the mood is going to be in the respective camps. So eventually, and this was in the 62nd minute, Anthony Elanga pulls one back to make it 3-1. But at that point, he still did feel nervous for Manchester City. But just to return a little bit back to your question, is I mean, a lot can happen between now and then. We do not know what both teams, what shape they will be in. We do not know what injuries there will be for any of those teams. We do not know how the Premier League table will look like. One would wonder, what does the Premier League table have to do with anything? Forget not that Arsenal are leading the summit of the Premier League table with 6 points, and it's Manchester City leading the chasing pack with 6 points behind them. So what happens in the Premier League possibly could have an impact on what happens in the finals of the Carabao Cup. Maybe by the time we get to that point of March 22nd, maybe Arsenal have sort of even widened the gap between them and Manchester City in terms of the Premier League title race, that Man City have sort of come to a resolve that, Arsenal have won this one and we do not have much to fight for in that one, but we can, fight tooth and nail and win the Carabao Cup and walk away with a piece of silverware this season, contrary to what was happening last season. We all know that last season, Manchester City did not win any piece of silverware. The Carabao Cup went to Newcastle. The FA Cup went to Crystal Palace. The Premier League title went to Liverpool. The UEFA Champions League went to PSG. So they did not win anything, apart from maybe the Community Shield, at the start of last season's campaign. So really, it's really hard for me to predict a present day. We know that these sides have already met once in the Premier League, and that one ended in a 1-1 draw at the Emirates Stadium. There will be a game, a return leg that will come later, even after the Carabao Cup final. That will come on the 18th of April. So as much as we envision a very, very brilliant final, I can't really tell you at this stage who I think will be winning that final, because I feel it will be both a disservice to you and a dishonest opinion in my regard, given that a lot can change between now and then. I'll give you an example. Arsenal already lost Mikel Merino to what is deemed to be at least a 2 months injury with in his right foot. As we speak, Bukayo Saka has missed the last two Arsenal games through injury, and we know that the way Arsenal accumulate injuries, literally it's like they're being paid to do so. So you never know. Manchester City, on the other hand, we know why they went in the transfer window to get Antoine Semenyo and McKay. It's because they had lost some significant players to injury. Joshko Vardiol, Ruben Diaz has just returned from a month is worse of injury and is now back in training. We do not know. John Stones has been away. Savinho has been absent. So really, Rodrigo Cascante Hernandez has had his fair share of injuries throughout the campaign. So I do not know. Maybe by the time we get there, they have all their full squad are literally available at their disposal, and so do Arsenal. Maybe one of them does not have a full squad. So a lot goes on in there in that calculation and determination. But yeah, I do anticipate that in the end of it all, it will be a very entertaining final, as we will see subsequently in regards to the effect of the two sides meeting there. But before we get to that, let's wrap up the tie itself, because again, once Newcastle score through Anthony Elanga, you felt that overall they were in a good space in that second half. They were in a good space. They felt good. They created the chances, but they were just not clinical enough. They were just not clinical enough. And like I've told you, Man City tended to have bad second halves, and yesterday was not different because they too missed some really, really good chances. Like I said, Aaron Ramsdale was forced into two brilliant serves by a second half substitute, brought Erling Haaland. But it was overall beautiful to watch. It was overall beautiful to watch. But twice he denied Haaland. On another occasion, Mad City put the ball wide of the mark, like we saw in the Tijan Render's attempt. Then I think there was something from Omar Mamosh, but it's all because that's what both sides could afford. And Man City won the game 3-1, 5-1 on aggregate to book their place in the final at Wembley. Now, this will be the second time that Arsenal meet Manchester City in the finals of the EFL Cup, at least in recent memory or in recent history. 6 years ago, in 2018, the two sides met in the finals of the EFL Cup, and Manchester City thrashed Arsenal by 3-0. Those goals scored by Sergio Kun Aguero, by Vincent Kompany, and I think David Silva, in a very, very strong Manchester City team that had the likes of Claudio Bravo in goal. They had players like Kyle Walker, players like Leroy Sané was part of that team. Then the two goal scorers that I've told you, Nicolas Otamendi, who is currently playing at Benfica, Ilkay Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne, Gabriel Jesus, and so many other brilliant players in that team. Fernandinho, Diallo, while Arsenal on the other side, you could feel that they were lightweight with the likes of David Ospina, Laurent Koscielny, Shkodran Mustafi, Calum Chambers, Danny Welbeck, Granit Xhaka, Aaron Ramsey, players like Hector Bellerin, Jack Wilshere, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Mesut Ozil, and things like that. So they got handed, I was going to use the wrong word, but they got thumped by 3-0. Now, I do not have a similar expectation because of what's happened. By that time, Mikel Arteta was on the opposite side of the dugout, versus Arsenal. So this time around, he is the man in charge. It will be the master versus the apprentice who can get the better of the other in a one-off game, in a final. Who needs the trophy more? I think Arsenal definitely and desperately need this trophy more. Why? Because they've gone five years without winning any major piece of silverware ever since winning the FA Cup in 2020. We know for a fact that up to until beating Chelsea home and away in the semi-finals of the competition 3-2 and 1-0 respectively, they had collapsed on 4 different occasions in different or competitions at the semi-finals in the UEFA Champions League last year, as well as the Carabao Cup against PSG and against Newcastle, respectively. So they bowed at the semi-finals. Then you have to rewind back in one of those UEFA Europa League competitions, excuse me, in one of those UEFA Europa League seasons where they equally got dumped out at the semi-finals. So it's been a long time coming of them trying to be there, trying to get to the finals. And I said, regardless of what the final result may come in the final, I think both sides, and particularly Arsenal, will be proud that they made it thus far. Now, psychologically, as why I say Arsenal needed more, majority of those players have not put their hands on a piece of silverware. I think the only two current Arsenal players in that squad that were present at the time when they beat Chelsea was Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli. I think those were the only Arsenal players in that squad that won the FA Cup in 2020. Now, because Arsenal have gone through this whole transformation, you have very many players in there that have never won anything, that are seeking glory. So for you to build a winning mentality in them psychologically, you need to start winning something. And like I keep saying, the Carabao Cup presents itself as the most golden opportunity, the most, the most significant chance or opportunity for Arsenal to put their hands on a piece of silverware. By the time we'll get to play that final, if they were to win it, for example, it would mean a lot in the state of the fight of their Premier League pursuit, which is the major accolade they are pursuing. It would mean perhaps a lot. We do not know what the context will be, but at least I think the round of 16 first leg of the UEFA Champions League may have been played by that point. So we do not know what it will amount to, but also Pep Guardiola on the other side, when you're rebuilding this Manchester City project, when you've come under constant scrutiny and speculation subject on your future, with reports yesterday from some Mokbel of the BBC indicating that he is not going to extend his contract ahead beyond June 2027, and yet there are some people within the corridors of power who say that even that he could leave at the end of the season. So, of course, Pep Guardiola himself has not come out to commit himself on anything. He does not say he's leaving. He simply reminds people that, excuse me, he simply reminds people that he still has a running contract with this Man City side. I remember in one of those press conferences, he was asking the journalists whether they were tired of him. Of course, it's not the case. But we know that Manchester City's tempo, their intensity has sort of declined a bit. Of course, with significant exits over time, players like David Silva, Sergio Kun Aguero, Vincent Kompany, more recently, Kevin De Bruyne, Kyle Walker, Ederson Morales, Stefano Ortega has followed them out of the door. Really, Joao Cancelo, Emerick Laporte, and all those kinds of players. Now, even though in some cases they've done well to replace and things like that, particularly this season and last season, things have not clicked much for them. The reason as why I say they've not clicked this season, even though they are not too far off, but they are far off by measure of their own standards, is that they are in the finals of the Carabao Cup. They are still in the FA Cup, well on still in the UEFA Champions League, in which they could possibly meet Inter Milan or Man City or Real Madrid or Bordeaux Glimmer, depending on who advances out of those sides. So they still look okay. They still look brilliant, for it. But while they look brilliant, and yesterday's game was an example of what they are capable of doing, is that to say that they've not been perfect. They've been far from good by their own standards, and Pep Guardiola knows that one too well. Of course, injuries have contributed to that. Then secondly, they are a team in transition. We saw from January last year the kinds of signings they made, by extension in the summer, and also in January, this recently concluded January, bringing in Mark Kehi and Antoine Semenyo. It's to continue that rebuild of the process while remaining very, very competitive, which they've so far done well in terms of remaining very, very competitive. So yeah, those were my key takeaways and observations from the game. Like I said, we are going to have a reincarnation of the 2018 final, and I hope it goes the best way possible. And I've given you what the implications are. So, with a lot of uncertainty being speculated about Pep Guardiola's future, if it is true that he intends to sign out of the club after 10 years, that's at the end of the season, then walking away with a piece of silverware will be equally of significance. It will be really, really important for them and for us to see how he bows out. That's why I say, leaving nothing to chance. We'll have to wait until March, perhaps March 20th or something. March 20th will be a Friday for us to discuss and see whether Man City have the cautions it takes to beat up against Arsenal in such an important final. Pedri Bola says, who will win the UEFA Champions League according to you? Now, similar to the earlier question about who I think on whether I think Arsenal will beat Man City to the in the finals of the Carabao Cup. What I will say about the UEFA Champions League is that we are still a long way out. We're going to see a lot of character and mentality in those teams when we get to the knockout stages that begin with the playoffs. But particularly once we get through the round of 16 and the quarterfinals and we reach the semifinals, at that stage, we can start to predict. Nonetheless, I can give you some of my favorites who I think are going to be in significant competition for the accolade. One, I'll say Bayern Munich. I'll say Liverpool. I'll say Barcelona. I'll say Real Madrid. I'll say PSG, although the possibility of PSG winning it again looks very, very unlikely, because rarely do you find a first-time UEFA Champions League winner return to defend it. But I'll add Arsenal to that list. So I'll give you those 6 teams. And it's not to say that there's no outlier that can come up as a dark horse and win it all. But it's simply to say that going by current trends, where all teams find themselves, the pedigree of Real Madrid cannot be objected to. And so and neither does that of Liverpool. We know they've won the competition 6 times. We know Barcelona have won it 5 times. We know that PSG are the reigning champions, and all that really. So we can't really count them off. So for me, those will be my favorites. Real Madrid, the most successful team in European football, why they lost to Benfica. It's not to say that in a home and away kind of meeting, perhaps Real Madrid will come out on top, while Benfica attempt to upset the balance of things. Benfica can also remember Porto also won. Yes, they can win. Now, any team in the competition can win. It just remains to be seen. But of course, when you're looking at that roster or the teams that are still in the competition, the teams that you look at and say, yeah, the chances of this one winning are close to 0.001. So depending on the size of the team. But as if they go on to grow into the tournament, your stance and odds could go on improving. So I'll give you an example. Carabao are still in the UEFA Champions League. Just imagine they knock out Newcastle at the playoff stage and then get to the round of 16 and knock out somebody, and suddenly they are into the quarterfinals. Definitely their chances go from 0.001% to maybe a 5%, or maybe even a 15%, depending on how they behave, So yeah, anything can happen. But still staying with the topic of the Carabao Cup final, Pep Guardiola wants a change in the rules of the EFL Cup to allow Mark Kehi play in that final. And his reasoning is that we have spent a lot of money in signing this player, and you are telling us he's not eligible to play, in this competition. I mean, he is our player. We've spent a significant amount of resources on him to bring him here and keep him here. So you can't just do a study like that. So let's see what Pep Guardiola did say exactly with reference to those remarks in the wake of in the work of what's his name? Sorry, in the wake of McKay being suspended. Now, here what the rules say. If you sign a player from any team in the Premier League before the first leg of the semi-finals, that player is eligible to play in the competition. You know? Then, if you sign a player after the first leg of the semi-final of the Carabao Cup, then he does not get to participate in the second semi-final, and nor does he get in the final. Those are the rules. So Pep Guardiola was speaking about this, and he said, hopefully we can convince the Carabao Cup that speaking about McKay, who did not feature, can play in this competition in the final. Guardiola told Sky Sports, and he added on by saying, because it's difficult to understand that the club makes a big investment to take one player, he belongs to us, and I do not understand why he cannot play in the final. Honestly, he goes on to add that hopefully we will make a letter, and hopefully the Carabao Cup understand once you have a buy a player, once you buy a player for a lot of money and he's not able to play because of a rule that I do not understand why, hopefully they can change it and he can play. So really, of course, this speaks about Guardiola's shortage in numbers in terms of their backline due to injuries to John Stones, Josh Kovadio, and like I said, most recently, Ruben Dias, who is returned back in training after a period of 1 month. So he knows yesterday he had to play with the backline of Nathan Ake and alongside Kushanov, and then Ake was withdrawn to bring on Max Alenia. We know that he had Rico O'Reilly and Matthias Nunes in the left back and right back positions, respectively. So if he can avoid anything that stops him from winning the Premier League, from winning this Carabao Cup final, then he will try to go for it. He will try to make sure that everything is in order, and that's why they will be requesting the Carabao Cup to review their stance on that. The final itself is expected to be a very tight fixture, and possibly because Pep Guardiola said they will be up against the best team in Europe, and the best team domestically and perhaps in Europe there. Then Manchester City's stadium attendance wasn't too bad, but was a bit also wanting. They managed to gather 41,834 fans out of the 53,400 seats available. Now, we spoke about this in the preview, although not on this forum, and I was telling people that Man City has used influencers before to attract people to come at home and watch the UEFA Champions League. So a lot is happening. A lot is happening. Then still speaking about the semi-final, he said, we are going to travel to London for the Carabao Cup. Arsenal, will await for us all this time. All the time we have to travel. Then he adds on that never the opposition travels to the north of England for a final. Now, Pep Guardiola, what he's trying to allude to here or to explain is that every time they've advanced to the finals of either the FA Cup or the EFL Cup, they are the ones who have had to travel to London. And perhaps he feels that puts them at a disadvantage. He's asking, why don't other teams come to the north and also play the final from there, First of all, let's not forget Wembley is the biggest stadium in the UK. So any final played there and that attracts a big crowd, that's some money for them, and particularly for the FA here. So there could be more reasons than one, other than money, other than the numbers of fans that you get in a stadium when you play at Wembley, as opposed to when, let's say, you play at St James's Park, or as you play at Old Trafford, or even the Etihad Stadium itself. This is son of Soweto says, "Good morning, Papa George." Good morning, son of Soweto. I hope you're doing okay. So yeah, those are some of the key, or those were some of the key takeaways from the semi-final game between Newcastle and Man City, and then obviously what Pep Guardiola had to say about the final. Looking very displeased by the fact that they have to always travel and things like that. Okay, so but does Pep Guardiola have a point? I mean, I never understand. For the part of the loaned players who, by the way, in the UEFA Champions League, they get to play even against their own teams. Domestically, I do not understand why. Maybe is there a fear of match fixing? Is there a fear of not being professional? Let's say you refuse to score against your side or defend properly against it. I do not know what the semantics are there are in, but he does have a point in trying to highlight those issues, to say he doesn't understand why you spend lots of money, 20 million quid, put a player on very significant wages, and suddenly he cannot play because of some back room, rule of some sort, and things like that. So, anyways, that was it from the Etihad Stadium. Um, okay. Ah, wow, 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 wow. Anyways, unless somebody has a question, but I think I've attended to all the questions. Away from Manchester City's engagements, there were other games being played across different competitions, from Italy to France to German in the DFB Pokal. So here is what you may have missed. Real Sociedad came from behind to beat up against Deportivo Alves by 3 goals to 2. Valencia were knocked out by Athletic Bilbao by 2 goals to 1. That's for the quarterfinals. Then in the Coppa Italia, you have Torino, you have Torino being beaten by Inter Milan by 2 goals to 1. In the German Bundesliga, for the DFB Pokal Cup, VfB Stuttgart beat up against Holstein Kiel by 3 goals to 0. Then in Coupe de France, Laurier beat up against Paris FC by 2 goals to 0. Lyon beat Laval by 2 goals to 0, while Nice beat up against Montpellier by 3 goals to 2. 1-0 was enough for Toulouse Amina, while Troyes managed to share the spoils in a 1-all draw. So that is what did transpire from competitions from elsewhere. Action does continue today. Atletico de Madrid will be up against Real Madrid in the quarterfinals. The other quarterfinal of the Copa del Rey, a very, very interesting game. Game will come at 11 p.m. East African time. Does promise to be a very, very entertaining fixture. It's always we know that Atletico de Madrid became the first team to beat Real Madrid this season when they beat them. Was it 5-2? Was it 5-2? So really, they'll be up against some familiar opponents when it comes to that. When it comes to that. Ah, okay. So yeah, do not miss out on that action. But no, that was John. Yes, Real Madrid won it by 5 goals to 2. This was in September. Then Real Madrid beat up against Atletico de Madrid in the semi-finals of the Supercopa España. So Kylian Mbappe and Arda Güler scored for Real Madrid, while Robin Lee Nomad, I don't know why I get caught up with Rodrigo's names. Robin Lee Nomad, Alexander Soroth, Raul Jimenez, and Antoine Griezmann were the goal scorers for Atletico de Madrid in that game that they thumped by Real Madrid by 5-2, which was the first loss to Real Madrid under Xabi Alonso in the Spanish La Liga. So we'll have to wait and see. We'll just have to wait and get there to that point and see what happens. Anyways, elsewhere in the Coppa Italia, Atalanta will be up against Juventus. That's also another quarterfinal. In Coupe de France, Strasbourg will be up against AC Monaco. Then Vancouver FC, Cruz Azul is still 0-0. Sorry, this was CONCACAF Championship Cup. Vancouver lost to Cruz Azul by 3-0 and things like that. Anyways, thank you, Son of Soweto. Thank you, Pedri Bola. Thank you so much, Seth, Joe, Pedri, and every single one of you that has been part of today morning's podcast. Allow me to wrap it up here and wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay blessed and let's catch up tonight at 11 p.m. East African time. Bye-bye for now. I'll see you guys later.